I didn't get into radio nearly as early as an awful lot. I found out later of my coworkers. My first time on the radio was not until I was 18, and I was a freshman in college, and there was an internship available at KMLO, and so I got that.
Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs, and it's an honor to be speaking with Southern California radio personality John Fox, and thanks for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, tell us about your life growing up and what got you interested in broadcasting.
Oh, well, let's see. I grew up in Fallbrook, California, which is about midway between San Diego and L.A., so it's heaven for radio listening in the 60s, and that's really what got me interested is, the best of the best were in one or the other of the two places. San Diego being a much smaller city, but still an incredibly competitive radio market back then. And so, I got to listen to KGB, KCBQ, KHJ, all during their best years in the 60s and 70s. And, some of the incredible people that went through there just really made me think, hey, I'd like to do that.
Mm-hmm. Who are your favorite DJs on those stations?
Well, I listen mostly to KCBQ, being 50,000 watts, and even though we lost them at night in Fallbrook because of their directional signal, they were always a little easier to get than KGB. And by the late 60s, they were kind of, beating KGB a little bit. And then I would also listen to KHJ in Los Angeles, which, being 100 miles away instead of 50, was, kind of exotic. So, but I heard Don Steele and a lot of great people there. But in San Diego, mostly listening to Q. I think some of my favorites were, probably my most favorite was Robert L. Collins, who went on to become Bob Collins in Chicago for many, many years. But, he was a top 40 DJ in San Diego, and it just really impressed me the way he would, and I heard later stories about him too, about how really even other DJs were kind of impressed with the way he worked as well. He'd take callers on the air and just somehow run them right up to the vocal, which, these days is easy with Shortcut and other various devices, but back then all you could do was either do it live and hope for the best or do it on tape and try to back time it. After having recorded some short little thing, 60 seconds earlier and getting it rewound on a tape just in time to replay. And he would take it right up to a vocal, and it was just kind of amazing. All the other jocks were kind of impressed with him, too, I found out later on. But, he just was a cool, together-sounding guy. Even before him, there was a guy, Bobby Wayne, in the evenings. On the rare occasions I did get to listen in the evening. Lee Baby Sims, who went on to a long career up in the Bay Area.
Lee Sims, in fact, was also on Carol A in Los Angeles back in the 70s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was before he moved up to San Jose for his long stint up there. Happy Hair was a huge morning show in San Diego, two different times, early 60s and before I was listening, and then again in the late 60s. He was so big, he jokingly said he'd run for mayor sometime, and everybody said, yeah, we'd vote for you. And, he almost became a serious candidate at one point. I talked to him on one of my interview shows years later. I finally got on KCBQ myself on an evening show after it had been sold to Salem. We did a show called I Still Q in My Car, based on their bumper sticker campaign, I Q in My Car. Mm-hmm. And I had him as a guest one night. That was one of my favorite shows. He was just a great guy. He went on to be pretty much just sales, radio sales in the 70s, and from then on, late 70s.
Wow.
But he was a really great guy. And their news department as well. Back then, even if it was a top 40 station, it was really kind of more like full service. And news was a requirement. And KCBQ had an incredible news department. Reed Carroll, who was a good friend of mine. I still see him at San Diego Press Club meetings. And we worked together for many years at KFMB, but he and Richard Mock, incredible voice. That, the guys that have been Tony the Tiger over the years, Richard Mock could have been one of them. He had that kind of a voice.
Wow.
So he was the voice of authority in the news department, and quite a few others as well.
Did Richard ever audition? Because I remember there was a list of finalists when Thurl Ravenscroft passed away that were going to be the new voice of Tony the Tiger. One of them was John Rydgren, the son of brother John Rydgren, who was in Los Angeles on Love Radio ABC. And then Ed McKay was also one of the finalists. I think it finally went to Lee Marshall. Do you know if Richard was one of the finalists for that coveted voice?
No, I don't. I should have asked him that. He's gone now, of course, but he would have been a good competitor for Lee Marshall, and Lee was also part of the Q News staff. So,
wow,
yeah, I'm remembering these names now as we're talking.
Was it hard to tell their voices apart from one another if you didn't know any better?
Reed and Richard had very distinct voices. Lee, maybe his voice wasn't quite so recognizable, but he had a way of speaking that was very recognizable. Lee Marshall, Q News, he was a little bit of a puker, but he used a lot of range of his voice, and that was sort of a different delivery from some of the others.
Now, growing up, did you get to visit those studios of KCBQ and KGB yourself, or were they kind of away from the public?
Not really as much as I would have liked to. KCBQ moved out to Santee in 1958, of course, long before me. And but I did get to go out there once when they did a contest, and I was in junior high at the time, and they did a favorite teacher contest, and it was a matter of just sending in signatures. And, whoever got the most votes through a list of signatures was chosen. And so I enlisted the older sister of a friend of mine to go around the high school. I was in junior high. She went around the high school and got signatures of all this math teacher's former students. This is a teacher I had in seventh. Did I have him in seventh and eighth? Anyway, I don't know. But, so we got not only signatures from the junior high, but also from the high school. I sent a list of at least 500 signatures. It was pretty impressive.
Wow.
And so we were chosen, along with several others. And on the night he went down, he said, "Oh, no, I'm not going alone. This is your fault. You're coming with me." So I got to see KCBQ for the first time doing that.
Wow.
And it was very cool. It was Lee Baby Sims hosting that night.
That's great. I think it was the afternoons on KCBQ, if I'm not mistaken, because there's a Fun 30 survey from 1970 that's in a book called When Radio Was Bossed by Bill Earl, who was like the original or the official Caraway historian, and it included a picture of Lee Baby Sims from KCBQ from like 1970. I think the survey was from the Fun 30 survey, as it was called back then. So now you got your career started at a place in Vista, and I know where Vista is because I actually went to summer camp 2 years in a row at Green Oak Ranch down there, KMLO. Tell us about how you got that job.
Yeah, it all started at a little 1,000-watt radio station in Vista, California. They were daytime at the time, but being, only about, 5-6 miles from where I lived, they sounded really strong on the dial. I never had the confidence, and I had extreme mic fright growing up, and I never had a lot of confidence to appear before people. So I didn't get into radio nearly as early as an awful lot. I found out later of my coworkers. My first time on the radio was not until I was 18. And I was a freshman in college, and there was an internship available at KMLO. And so I got that, and that was my first job, unpaid. And their transmitter and studios were out in the foothills, a little south of Highway 76, off of North Santa Fe and Vista. Fairly long dirt road, which was really difficult going in the winter. But I had a front-wheel drive car at the time, one of the few, so while most of them had to park and walk, they either had to wait for me to drive them up there or hitch a ride with me somehow. But that was owned by a couple whose name I keep forgetting lately. They were the nicest couple. And like I said, it was daytime only. One of the interesting things about it was that when they signed off at night, KFMB in San Diego bought spots on KMLO, inviting everybody to tune over to KFMB when KMLO signed off. That's clever marketing.
Yeah, it is.
And one of the reasons I never got a job there or actually got on the air other than as a news intern was because they required a first. For those who don't know, that's first radio telephone license. And I did not have that at the time. I did get my third, and I started studying for the first on my own. I didn't go to school like so many people did with their crash course, Don Martin. Mm-hmm. But by the time I was about ready to get serious about taking the first test, I moved on and wasn't at KMLO anymore. That was the only time I ever would have needed it.
Wow. So then after
everything else at the time, if they had a full-time engineer, only required a third, and I already had that by then.
Now, what work did you do at KMLO? Some of the things that you did, besides, of course, chauffeur people up the hill.
Well, the first thing they had me do, which apparently is the first thing they have every newbie do, is change the ribbon on the teletype machine. Which those old machines, it was impossible not to get it all over you. So that was like they're hazing for the new guy. Then I was writing for the news director, and then finally he actually put me on the air doing the news while he was doing a DJ show.
Wow. And
so I never got on as a DJ at KMLO, and they were formatted pretty much like all the other stations, relatively top 40, maybe slightly MOR, a little bit more, Frank Sinatra and whatnot than the top 40 station would have.
Wow.
I added to my record collection quite a lot, thanks to them. And the music director, whenever he got something, we're never going to use that. So, I got the latest Steely Dan album and things like that.
Wow. Do you still have any of those 45s with you?
No 45s. No, I got to go through the promotional albums.
Oh, wow.
That was where I first discovered Monty Python. I thought, this looks interesting, and I got a Monty Python album from them, and like I said, Steely Dan, some of the other mid-70s stuff. Wow,
that's great. Then after that, you went to KFMB?
Yeah, so then this was, my internship was through Palomar College, and I moved to San Diego State to finish out my degree in telecommunications and film with a minor in journalism. And while I was there, they offered an internship at KFMB, which turned out to be producing a public affairs show on B100. Now, this all came together because while I was at Palomar, one of my projects in a radio class was to interview some program directors, and I had chosen Bobby Rich in San Diego as one of them. And we did an interview in which he may have tipped me off as the first person outside of the company to know that B100 was going to be going on the air. We just got to talking and doing the interview and about market share and positioning formats and all that. And he mentioned to me that they were going to be changing the FM, which had been beautiful music up until that point, and getting their brains beat out against 4 other beautiful music stations in town on the FM, and thought they would give Top 40 a try. Now, KSON-FM, which was then going under the call letters KSEA, was doing Top 40. In fact, their program director initially was Gary Allen from KCBQ, who is another one of the guys I used to listen to in the late 60s and early 70s.
Wasn't he called the world's tallest midget?
Yeah, leader of the little people. And he broadcast from his wine-colored, velvet-covered couch. Gary's a great guy. I still see him every once in a while. He lives up near us, near Paula, where I work now.
Cool.
So Bobby divulged that they were going to be changing, and because KSEA had just given up trying to do top 40 on FM. And so within 3 months, they were going to flip their FM. So I knew that. And then by the time I got to San Diego the following year and found this internship and went down to interview for it, the guy who interviewed me was Bobby and his assistant, Rob. Mm. And so, having slightly known me before and knowing that I had already worked on the air at KMLO, they made me the producer of the public affairs show.
Wow.
On the FM. And that actually wasn't even me being on the air. It was me actually producing the show, conducting the interviews, editing the tapes, all that. Mm-hmm. But it led to full-time work there.
Who hosted the public affairs shows?
That particular show was hosted by a rotation of students in a radio production class at San Diego State.
Wow.
But, yeah, I was the first producer of the week because I had the most experience, and then they just ended up having me do the entire show instead of having one of the staffers record and produce and edit and all that. They just had me do it.
How long did it usually take per week to record, edit, and finally put out the final product?
Well, depends on what's involved. I mean, if you have to write it, there's a lot of time involved. In this case, the students wrote it. All I had to do was be there for the half hour they recorded it, and mark all the edit points, spend another 15 minutes to a half hour editing it, mix it down with the intros and outros, and, hour and a half probably total.
We're talking with Southern California radio personality and currently the general manager of Res Radio, KPRI in Paula. And next time, John Fox shares the unusual story about how he first got on the air on B100.